The hallway outside the studio smelled like fresh paint and cold coffee. Michelle had walked this hallway 3 times before, always rushing, always 5 minutes later than she meant to be. This time she wasn't rushing. She was standing completely still, staring at her phone, reading the same 6 words over and over like they might rearrange themselves into something else if she looked hard enough. We've decided to move forward with someone else. Her knees went weak, not a figure of speech. She actually felt her legs lose their certainty, felt herself lean back against the wall just to stay upright. The deal was gone, not delayed, gone. The producer had waited 4 months for the demo she promised in 1. 4 months of polite check-ins, turning into shorter replies turning into silence, silence turning into this. He'd finally moved on to another artist, someone who sent an unfinished file on time instead of a perfect one 2 seasons late. She read the message a second time, like it might change. It didn't. What Michelle didn't know yet was that this wasn't really about a demo. It was about a spirit she had never learned to name. Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. Somewhere in your life right now, there's a version of that 6-word message waiting for you. A door closing quietly while you tell yourself you still have time. So in the comments, type the one thing you've been putting off longer than you'd like to admit. Not to shame yourself, just to name it, because you're about to find out exactly why naming it matters more than you think, and I'm going to come back to your comment by the end of this video and see if anything changed. 3 months before that text message froze her outside the studio door, Michelle was standing in a different doorway entirely, the one leading into her church's rehearsal room, guitar case in hand, humming a melody she'd written in the car on the way there. "Sing that last part again," said Pastor Reynolds, leaning against the piano with his arms crossed, the way he always did when something caught his attention. The line about the valley. Michelle laughed, a little embarrassed. "It's not even finished." "Doesn't sound unfinished to me." He shook his head slowly. "Michelle, I've been pastoring for 22 years. I've heard a lot of voices come through that door. What you've got isn't something you learn, it's something you're given." He paused, letting the words land before he said the rest. "You weren't made for this room. This room is just where you're standing right now." She smiled at that, the way she always did when he said things like this, half believing it, half wondering if it would ever actually happen for her. It wasn't just his words. It was the songs that came out of her in 15 minutes when other writers spent months chasing the same feeling and never catching it. It was the way a room went quiet when she sang, not because she demanded it, but because something in her voice made silence feel necessary. And it wasn't just talent. Almost every night, alone in her room with the lights off, Michelle prayed the same prayer, whispered into the dark like she was afraid saying it too loud might scare it off. "God, increase me. Open the doors, Gether. You've already put in front of me. Let me actually walk through them this time." She meant every word of it. That was the part that made everything after this so hard to untangle later, because Michelle wasn't a fraud, and she wasn't lazy in the way people usually mean it. She was sincere in that prayer, and stuck in her own pattern at the exact same time, asking God for doors, while something quieter than sin and louder than excuse kept her hand just far enough from the handle. Nobody falls from a studio door in one step. They fall from 100 smaller doors first, the kind nobody thinks to count. Take her sister's birthday dinner. Michelle stood in front of her closet for 40 minutes, holding up one outfit after another, texting her sister the same line she always sent. "Almost ready, leaving in 5. She wasn't leaving in 5, she left in 35. When she finally slid into the booth, her sister Danielle didn't even look up from the menu. "You know the reservation was for 7, right?" I know. Michelle slid her jacket off, laughing it away. "Traffic? It's always traffic with you." Danielle said it light, almost joking, but there was an edge underneath it, that had been there for years. One day, I'm going to stop believing that. Michelle laughed again, waved it off, ordered a drink. She didn't clock the warning in her sister's voice. She never did. Back at her apartment, the same pattern kept repeating in smaller rooms nobody else could see. Dishes sat in the sink for 3 days, not because she was buried in work, but because the couch was closer and the television was louder than her conscience. Her grandmother called on a Tuesday. Michelle meant to call back. She actually said the words out loud to her empty kitchen. "I'll call her tonight." Tonight became Thursday. Thursday became the following week, when her friend finally asked her about it over coffee. Half joking, half concerned, Michelle had an answer ready, the way she always did. "I'm just laid back," she said, shrugging. "I work better under pressure anyway." She believed that sentence completely. It was the explanation she reached for every single time, smooth and reasonable, the kind of thing people nodded along to, because it sounded like personality, instead of what it actually was. Here's what Michelle didn't know yet, standing in that kitchen with an unmade phone call and a stack of dishes behind her. James chapter 4 verse 17 says that if anyone knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for them it is sin. Not a quirk, not a personality trait, not something to laugh off over dinner. By that standard, every "almost ready, leaving in 5, and every "I'll call her tonight" wasn't just inconvenience, it was something she was going to have to answer for, whether she was ready to or not. Still standing outside the studio door, phone in hand, Michelle felt something worse than heartbreak creeping up behind the shock. A memory, then another one. 2 doors she'd spent 2 years convincing herself didn't matter anymore. The first one was a scholarship application for a songwriting program, the kind that only opened once a year. Michelle had worked on her submission for months, rewriting the same paragraph until she genuinely believed it was close to perfect. Her friend Jordan, who'd applied and gotten in the year before, texted her the night before it was due. "You submitted yet?" "Almost done. Just polishing it," she'd typed back, still adjusting a sentence she'd already rewritten 4 times. She missed the deadline by 6 hours. 6 hours, tweaking a paragraph nobody but her would have ever noticed. Jordan called her the next day, gentler than she deserved. "Michelle, it was good enough 2 weeks ago. What happened?" "I don't know," Michelle had said, and at the time, she really didn't. The second one hurt worse, because someone else had done the hard part for her. Her mentor, a producer named Carla who'd taken an interest in her early on, personally introduced her over email to a contact at a record label, the kind of introduction people wait years for and never get. "Don't sit on this one," Carla told her over the phone, half laughing, half serious. "These doors don't stay open forever." Michelle promised she wouldn't. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment to reach out, wanting her portfolio a little more polished first, her pitch a little more perfect. The right moment quietly became next week. Next week became never. When Carla asked about it months later, Michelle mumbled something about timing and changed the subject, and Carla, sensing there was nothing left to say, let it go. Michelle had buried both of those losses so deep she'd almost convinced herself they didn't count, telling herself this studio deal was just bad luck, just bad timing, one more thing that had happened to her instead of something that came from her. Standing outside that door now, she finally let herself see all 3 side by side for the first time. Michelle hadn't been unlucky 3 times. She'd been the common denominator 3 times. And that realization cracked something open in her that no amount of talent had ever been able to fix. Michelle didn't remember the drive home from the studio. She just remembered sitting in her car in the driveway, engine off, phone in her lap, finally calling the one person she trusted to tell her the truth instead of comforting her out of it. Pastor Reynolds picked up on the second ring. "Michelle, you okay?" "The deal fell of," she said, and then, Before he could respond, she kept going. But that's not even why I'm calling. Pastor, this is the third time. The scholarship, the introduction Carla set up, now this. 3 times. And I keep telling myself it's bad luck, but it's not bad luck. It's me. There was a pause on the line, the kind he used when he wanted her to actually hear what came next. Can I tell you something you're not going to want to hear? He said. Warfare doesn't always look like a battlefield. Sometimes it looks like a snooze button. Michelle almost laughed, except nothing about it felt funny. What do you mean? Ephesians 6:12 says our fight was never against flesh and blood. It's against rulers, against authorities, against spiritual forces we can't see. He let that sit a second. We picture warfare loud, chains breaking, dramatic deliverance, somebody screaming in a prayer line. But most of the time it's quiet. Most of the time it hides behind something so ordinary, nobody thinks to question it. Like being laid back, Michelle said slowly, hearing her own words from 100 conversations come back to her differently now. Like being laid back, he repeated. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, says the weapons of our warfare aren't physical, but they're powerful enough through God to pull down strongholds, to cast down every argument that raises itself against what we know to be true. Michelle, a stronghold isn't just a bad habit. It's a pattern of thinking that's built itself a fortress in your mind, one that convinces you it's simply who you are. So it hides, she said quietly, behind a personality trait instead of a prayer request. Exactly. Because a trait doesn't get prayed against, a stronghold does. And the enemy would much rather you call it just who you are than call it what it actually is. She sat in the silence of her car for a long moment after they hung up, the driveway dark, the porch light the only thing on. And for the first time in years, she asked God a different question than the one she'd been praying for months. Not, why haven't you opened the door yet? Something more specific. Something she'd been avoiding, because some part of her already suspected the answer. God, what is this really? She didn't hear a voice. She didn't need one. One word rose up in her so clearly she couldn't pretend not to hear it. Sitting there in the quiet, with her hands still on the wheel. Delay. Naming the spirit was one thing, sitting alone in a car. Saying it out loud to another human being was harder, and Michelle knew instinctively she needed to do it anyway. She called Jordan the next morning, the same friend who'd texted her the night before that missed scholarship deadline. I need to tell you something, Michelle said, and I need you to not let me talk my way out of it later. Okay, Jordan said slowly. I'm listening. I don't have a laid-back personality. I have a stronghold called delay, and it's cost me 3 doors in 2 years, and I'm done pretending it's just how I am. There was a pause, and then Jordan said, quieter than usual, Michelle, I've known you 5 years. I've been waiting for you to say that out loud. That was step 1, naming it, in prayer, and to one person who wouldn't let her shrink it back down to a personality quirk. Step 2 came a few days later. Michelle fasted for 3 days, not chasing a visible miracle, not expecting lightning to strike, but choosing to break agreement with the pattern in her body before she asked it to change in her calendar. It was uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. Step 3. She built into her mornings on purpose. I need you to text me every single day, she told Jordan. Not to check if I'm doing okay, to check if I did the thing I said I'd do. Even when it's small, especially when it's small. Jordan agreed, and the first text came at 6 o'clock the next morning. Did you do it? 3 words, every day, in the exact area Michelle had spent years hiding from anyone who might ask. Step 4 was quieter, just her and her Bible open on the kitchen counter each morning, before anything else got her attention. She wrote 3 verses on an index card and taped it above her desk, where she'd have to see it every time she wanted to look away from work instead of toward it. Galatians 6:9, that she would not grow weary in doing good, because in due season she would reap if she did not give up. Philippians 1:6, that the one who began a good work in her would carry it on to completion. Psalm 27:14, to wait on the Lord and be of good courage, and he would strengthen her heart. She read them out loud, not as decoration, but as fuel for the mornings her old pattern tried to convince her nothing had changed. Step 5 was the hardest one to practice and the simplest one to explain. She started acting before she felt ready. She sent the unfinished email instead of waiting for the perfect one. She submitted the imperfect draft. She showed up 5 minutes early instead of 5 minutes late, on purpose, every single day, even when early felt like fighting her own body to get there. Step 6, she confessed quickly instead of hiding slowly. The first time she slipped, just 3 weeks in, missing a small deadline for a friend's project, her old instinct was to bury it and hope nobody noticed. Instead, she called Jordan that same night. "I slipped today," she said. "Small thing, but I want to say it out loud before I talk myself into thinking it doesn't count." "Good," Jordan said. "That's the whole difference right there." None of these 6 things looked spiritual from the outside. A phone call, a fasted lunch, a 3-word text every morning, an index card taped above a desk. But that's exactly the part people miss. The discipline was the deliverance. 6 weeks in, it happened again. It was small, smaller than the studio deal, smaller than the scholarship, smaller than anything that had broken her before. A deadline for a friend's project, one she'd promised to turn around by Friday. Friday came and went. She sent it Monday, 3 days late, with an apology attached that felt too familiar in her own mouth. The shame that came back wasn't quiet this time. It was louder than before, worse than before, whispering the one sentence she'd been afraid of since the day she called Jordan and named the whole thing out loud. Nothing has actually changed. 6 weeks was never going to undo years. Who were you kidding? She sat with her phone in her hand for a long time that night, the old instinct rising up in her. The one that wanted to bury this the way she'd buried the scholarship and Carla's introduction, quietly, without telling anyone, until enough time passed that it stopped feeling real. Instead, within the hour, she called Jordan. "I slipped," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word. "Bad one this time. I don't know if any of this is even working." Jordan didn't rush to comfort her. "You called me within the hour," Jordan said. 6 weeks ago, it would have taken you 6 months to even mention it. That's not nothing, Michelle. That's the fight still going. Michelle didn't feel better right away. She sat with the doubt a while longer, the way grief sits in a room even after someone tells you it's going to be okay. But she remembered something Pastor Reynolds had told her once, back before any of this had a name. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 3, that the vision is for an appointed time, and though it tarries, we're to wait for it, because it will surely come and will not delay. It will not delay. She almost laughed at the word choice, sitting there in the dark. She didn't quit. The next morning she got up anyway, made the call she'd been putting off, and kept going, not because the shame had disappeared, but because she finally understood that one missed deadline wasn't proof the pattern had won. It was proof the pattern was still fighting, and things worth fighting for don't usually surrender quietly. 3 years is a long time. It's not long enough to erase a pattern completely, and Michelle would be the first to tell you that. She still feels the pull some mornings, the couch still looks more inviting than the work waiting on her desk, the old voice still whispers that 5 more minutes won't hurt anything. The difference now is what she does with that pull. She notices it, names it, and moves anyway. The songs get finished now, the emails go out on time. When opportunity knocks, she answers it instead of promising herself she'll get to it later. Her phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. An unfamiliar number with a familiar area code. She almost let it go to voicemail out of habit before catching herself and picking up. "Michelle? It's Grant Bennett." A pause, like he wasn't sure she'd remember him. From the label, It's been a few years. Her stomach dropped for a second, old memory rising fast. The hallway, the text message, the 6 words. I remember, she said carefully. Listen, I know how things ended last time, and I'll be honest, that's part of why I hesitated to call. He exhaled. But I've heard some of your newer work through a mutual friend, and I wanted to ask if you might have something ready to send over. No pressure on the timeline. Take whatever time you. I already have it ready, Michelle said. I can send it in the next 10 minutes. There was a pause on his end, the kind that told her he wasn't used to hearing that answer. You're serious. Completely. She sent the file before he'd even finished asking, and this time when she read his reply, she wasn't holding her breath waiting for a rejection. She read it once, and it said everything she needed it to say the first time. Michelle's gift was never the problem. It never needed more talent, more time, or a bigger door than the ones already in front of her. It needed her to stop negotiating with delay and start naming it. Because some strongholds don't fall to more prayer alone. They fall to prayer that finally gets specific. James chapter 1 verse 22 tells us to be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving ourselves. If delay has already cost you a door, this is your sign to stop asking God to open another one and start asking Him what's been keeping your hand from the one that's already open in front of you.